Okay, so we have the latest data from the Sunday Independent Ireland Thinks poll, and we've been asking the public what they think about the story of the week, probably the story of the summer, if not the story of the year. The Ryan Tubridy payments debacle, the crisis that has now taken hold of RTE, the national broadcaster. And we've got loads of questions, but we're going to focus on a few specific ones for the purposes of this discussion with Kevin Cunningham from Ireland Thinks. Do you think there's been too much focus on the scandal at RTE? 67% of the public think no. Yes, 28%, not sure, 5%. Are you satisfied with the account offered by RTE executives at the two Oireachtas committee hearings this week? An overwhelming majority, 89%, say no. Yes, 4%, unsure, 7%. And most interestingly, I think, who is to blame for the RTE Tubridy scandal? The RTE executive as a whole, 73%. Dee Forbes, the former Director General, 12%. Ryan Tubridy, just 7%. His agent, Noel Kelly, just 4%. Not sure, no interest, just 4%. So just to take that first finding, Kevin, in terms of the focus, I mean, there's been saturation of coverage across the media, including The Independent, over the last 10 days. And it appears that the public think it is justified, judging by that result.
Yeah, it is staggering. I mean, that 67% is a clear indication that even in spite of wall-to-wall coverage, really must be said, that people think there still should be more into this topic. I mean, I think it's deep down, I think one of the critical things that's happening here is a lot of it is about money. Yeah. And the fact that these people are being paid very, very large amounts. But one could easily dismiss public opinion on the basis of the fact that perhaps, perhaps the public might want them to be paid almost nothing, right? But actually, we have other questions which ask the public exactly how much these people should be paid. And it's not, the public are very clear in terms of the fact that they shouldn't be paid absolutely nothing, but there's a kind of a middle ground, and clearly in this case the payments are beyond that middle ground. I think at the core that seems to be what a lot of this is about.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is that who is to blame? I think if you'd have asked that question a week ago, most people probably would have pointed at the likes of Ryan Tubridy and Noel Kelly, whereas this week, after two disastrous Oireachtas committee hearings for the top execs at RTE, people are laying the blame for this controversy at the board, at the executive board of RTE, the top brass within the organisation. And that to me says that this is far more, it's not just about this one guy, Ryan Tubridy. Yeah. This is about a systemic problem within the national broadcaster, like a real proper crisis. That it now will necessitate the sort of response that perhaps we wouldn't have anticipated 10 days ago, whereby root and branch review, we're going to have this external governance review that's been commissioned by the governments. We're going to get the details on that next week. And I think it's really indicative now of RTE being a very different broadcaster in the future to what it was prior to this scandal breaking.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Returning to that number, 73%, as you said, focusing on the executive. That distinction is very, very clear there, I think. And it's even obvious in some of our other questions, as we'll see in the paper, obviously, in relation to whether people want Ryan Tubridy, whether they think it's okay for him to come back, actually, and all this sort of stuff. It's very obvious that the focus of attention has been very central on this executive, and the scale of the changes that are needed are obviously quite substantial. And we have other questions on the level of trust in RTE, and indeed, we cross-reference that against actual RTE viewers. And it's very clear that this is a very serious problem that the executive itself needs to get a handle on.
Yeah. So we've also polled, obviously, on all of the issues that we usually poll on, the bread and butter issues, and we've asked about the state of the parties, obviously, and what people are thinking in terms of their voting intentions. And I suppose that result is reflective, perhaps, of the fact that the news agenda has been dominated by one story, and it's not necessarily been about the government or a crisis engulfing the coalition. So the state of the parties, Sinn Féin on 31, down 1. Fine Gael on 19, down from 20% last month. That's their first in the Ireland Thinks series, a record low, I think you could describe it.
That's true.
But it's only a drop of 1 point on last month. Fianna Fáil, no change, 19. Social Democrats, no change on 6. Green Party, no change on 3. Labour down 1 to 2. Solidarity, People for Profit on 4. Up to Aim 2 on 3, no change, and Independents and Others on 13, up 1. So what's this telling us then, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, you could say, look, a lot of this is within the margin of error, and that is true, but the overall trends are quite clear in the last couple of months, where one might have expected Fine Gael to recover and Fianna Fáil to decline as the salience and the centrality of Micheál Martin might have reduced. That hasn't quite happened. The two parties have actually converged in this poll. As they say, 19 is in fact the lowest that we have for Fine Gael on record. That said, we do have another poll within the paper which pits Leo Varadkar versus Simon Harris, and in fact, in that contest, things perhaps are slightly different. But obviously, by the paper to read that one because that's
or independent.ie,
particularly interesting. But the Labour figure is also quite interesting. I mean, on 2%, that's a drop of 1%, and that is the lowest figure for the Labour Party that Ireland Thinks have ever had. And
I mean, that is extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, the Labour Party, who changed their leader over a year ago now because of, amongst other things, low poll ratings.
Yeah.
And there's just really no evidence that any work that they're doing is catching the imagination of the general public. And 2%, I mean, that's statistical insignificance nearly, isn't it?
Well, you know, the interesting thing is, I mean, if you go back to that period when they changed leader, Alan Kelly, as a leader, in his approval ratings, he was actually doing relatively well. But so is Ivana Bacik. So, you know, her leadership approval rating is still relatively okay for a party on 2%. It's good. I mean, you know, the Green Party are on 3, and yet Eamon Ryan's rating in this poll is 1.9, significantly lower than that of Ivana Bacik. So it's not just a leader issue. It is this brand issue. And I think for the Labour Party, you know, they had their review that was reported relatively recently, though written some time ago. For the Labour Party, it's always been in a difficult position because a lot of its vote stems from the period when it was in government. It is kind of relatively close to Fine Gael, that particular vote, and trying to win a vote which is kind of anti-government, anti-Fine Gael and that sort of stuff. It's always been in this bind of, well, the easiest votes for the Labour Party to win over are those for whom are kind of a little bit more middle class, while at the same time the people who are much more likely to be opposed to government and similar to the sorts of issues that they're trying to campaign on would tend to be opposite to the government, more working class, lower socioeconomic grades and that sort of stuff. So that shift, which is kind of needed to happen for the Labour Party, hasn't really happened. And I think probably for that reason it struggled. And obviously you have at the same time, as you said, the Social Democrats on 6%. Yeah. It's like
kind of consolidating, I suppose, really, right?
Well, and one of the interesting things I think about politics over time is that parties have to continually win new voters. If you don't, you will go down in support because people die or people, you know, leave the country or stop voting or whatever. So you have to continually win new voters to even stay afloat. And I think that's probably what the problem is, perhaps for the Labour Party, because for those newer, younger voters, and we've seen in the very youngest age groups that the Social Democrats are doing relatively well, the Labour Party will struggle to kind of get into that particular group.
So I'm going to put you on the spot. Labour, is there a way back at this point? This low, a change of leader a year ago, no sign of them recovering.
I mean, in a weird way, I would never say never, right? Because, I know that sounds bizarre, but we've seen in electoral contests in a lot of different countries, and I bring up the example of the Social Democratic Party in Germany, albeit a bigger party, but was really, really on the way down, and then suddenly recovered with a leader whom no one really expected. Ivana Bacik is, as we saw in the by-election where she won very successfully, she had an ability to turn things around. Whether that actually happens when the election itself is called, we don't know, because we don't know what's going to happen when the election is called. But as it stands, as they say, you know, this 2% in and of itself is difficult for the party as well, you know, and that's critical. I mean, that's the one figure. Obviously, as you said, the Fine Gael figure is the other one, but perhaps Leo Varadkar is safer than many of the media reports suggest, because as we might see in the newspaper, there's other indications. That
and I think also from Fine Gael's perspective, I mean, dropping to 19 is it's not a huge drop from 20. They seem to be in and around that space, and I suppose for the coalition as well, when you tot up the figures, they're still polling at 40% thereabouts between Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, the Greens. Now there's a question whether the Greens would ever go back if they return 3% of TDs, which would be far fewer than the ones that they have now. But also the other issue, I suppose, is Sinn Féin on 31, but building the coalition could be the problem for them.
There's one. You mentioned the Green Party. There's one other thing to mention about the Green Party, and it's reflected in this poll where you see 1.9%. The average rating for Eamon Ryan of 1.9, and as the poll we had last month, which showed how they were the most toxic party. That 3% for the Green Party, it's I don't know whether it's going to get them any seats next time because they're not going to be getting transfers from the opposition parties, and they're not really going to get transfers from the government parties either because of there's a lot of kind of opposition, I think, to the Green Party and Eamon Ryan in particular. And so trying to, when you're a party on a low polling, it's very hard to kind of actually get seats unless you're transfer friendly, which is where the Social Democrats are. And so I think, when you come back to the idea of, what would the next election look like and
the next government,
you take these figures and add them up.
Yeah.
You actually don't get any government, to be honest with you, because Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Green Party don't add up to enough to get a government.
Sure.
The opposition don't add up either. And
sure. Okay. Well, plenty to ponder then for the political party leaders this weekend. Everyone obviously obsessed with the Ryan Tubridy RTE story, but for the politicians, plenty of food for thought in the Ireland Things poll tomorrow. And we'll have more results on the Ryan Tubridy RTE crisis, including the public's verdict on whether or not Ryan Tubridy should ever return to RTE, as Kevin mentioned earlier, in the Sunday Independent and on independent.ie on Sunday.